a meeting with a Japanese, a subcontinental Asian, a Swiss person, and myself, an African. And I couldn't help thinking through the whole time that, living as I do in London, this is the most cosmopolitan place in the world. And right after that thought, it occurred to me that there is one truth about life. If you take an exam and fail it, you are destined to do retakes until you pass the exam. Because the retakes are disruptive and costly of time, effort, sometimes fees, and so on and so forth, it's important to try and pass any test the first time round. And I was thinking that because of the times in which we live, which there are two major indicators of the trouble we're in, the first being censorship. And no, I'm not saying that just because I'm a journalist and it's inconvenient. The thing about censorship is that censorship of the scale on which we're seeing it is usually about darkness. And darkness is the most magnificent growth medium for things which are evil, destructive, and retrograde. The things that you're proud of, you normally want to shout about. But the things that you need to hide are usually things which are shameful. And I'm going to go through the major genocides of the last century. The first genocide, most people don't know, was the Herero and Nama genocides in Namibia between 1904 and 1908. The German Empire murdered 24 to 100,000 Hereros, 10,000 Nama, and an unspecified number of the San people in the state of Namibia, because these people stood up against the German Empire and wanted their land back. They were just slaughtered. The result of it, this was between 1904 and 1908, was that in 2021, finally, the German government agreed a resettlement fee for the Namibians of 1.1 billion euros. It's chicken feed. One human life is worth more. But their acknowledgement that something evil had taken place was very important. That's going to be paid over 30 years. Then followed the Jewish Holocaust. 6 million people, again, slaughtered on an industrial scale. Again, this time by Germany. Then followed an even bigger genocide. This was the Congolese Holocaust, attributed to King Leopold II of Belgium, in which 10 to 15 million Congolese in the Congo Free State were just snuffed out like that, as if they weren't human. Of course, before that, we'd have the transatlantic slave trade. And after the Congolese genocide, there was the Rwandan genocide. By all accounts, very small. I think the numbers didn't equate to those of the Jewish Holocaust, or the Congolese Holocaust, or the transatlantic slave trade, but a genocide nevertheless. Now, what is interesting is that when the slave trade happened, nobody cared because there was African lives being killed. When the Namibian Holocaust by the German Empire happened, nobody cared because they were Africans. When the Jewish Holocaust happened, people made it a crime against Jewish people. The human ramifications of the Jewish Holocaust by the Nazis was completely lost. This was a crime against mostly white people, I've got to say. And so now that was a crime. But the lesson wasn't extended beyond that. And that is why the Holocaust kept going. Now, at each one of these events, we had the opportunity to draw a line in the sand and say that humanity, any human being, could not be treated like that. The only one that's really properly documented is the Jewish Holocaust, leading to the Nuremberg trials and full documentation in history. I bet you, I would say, probably 6 out of 10 Africans haven't heard about the Namibian genocide. I would say 9 out of 10 Europeans haven't heard about the Namibian genocide. I would say 9 out of 10 Europeans don't know anything about the Congolese genocide. But of course, everybody's heard about the Rwandan genocide because it was the black people who were doing it. You see, it's these double standards that I would say make us all perfect victims for anybody who would want to supplant our sovereignty and rule over us all. And that, I would argue, is the biggest danger of a time in which censorship is running on a scale never before seen in my lifetime. While an apparent pandemic is running around the world with medical public policy being driven by a few appointed experts and no dissenting voices are being tolerated. The point is very simple. If there is the risk of this global totalitarian state over the horizon, which anybody who is a student of history would be insane not to recognize the dangers of, it's been clearly spoken about, Agenda 21, the Sustainable Development Goals of 2030. It's actually a milestone, kind of you're a third of the way along Agenda 21. And by the year 2050, the plans have all been written up by the United Nations, the World Economic Forum, and others. They are planning a world which you and I will never and cannot even imagine how it's going to be, but it's all been documented and planned. And why are we all falling victim to this? It's because it never happened to mostly European people. And because of that, we are disunited and unable to unite. Now, my point is this. If we make the same mistake we made after the transatlantic slave trade, if we make the same mistake after the Namibian Holocaust, if we make the same mistake as we did after the Jewish Holocaust, if we make the same mistake as we did after the Congolese Holocaust, the Congolese genocide, then we are sleepwalking to Armageddon this time again. Why? Because the only reason people seem to stand up, even against this terrible threat that confronts all of us, is that they're afraid they're going to lose their privileges. If we think we're fighting to retain our liberties, freedom of speech, freedom of movement, freedom of thought, so that we can relaunch Supremacism V.02, we are doomed to fail. And this is something I'd like everybody to ponder, because it's the elephant in the room. Rather like Abraham Lincoln, when the southern states decided to secede, he started a war, first of union. He was on the brink of losing that war to keep his states together until he extended it to a war of emancipation. Then and only then did he win. And so the purpose of this post is to say to you all, my friends, do not moan about our circumstances just because many people are worried that they're going to lose their exalted position atop a highly discriminatory tree and create, and because they miss the existence of their racial privileges. If they have that attitude, they won't find the strength to be able to pursue this. We have to decide that this is a war, a battle, an ideological, a mental, a spiritual struggle to protect the whole of humanity. Until we're able to do that, we're destined to have to sit this exam again. I think it's worth a thought.